The water turns red, not slowly, not gradually, in seconds. One moment, the Rio Negro is black glass. The next, it's boiling crimson, churning with 1,000 silver bodies, each one armed with razor teeth that can strip flesh from bone in heartbeats. Carlos Mendez is waist-deep in this nightmare. His hands grip a net that everyone in his village called prehistoric. A net woven from palm fibers his grandfather taught him to twist. A net the modern fishermen mocked as they showed off their nylon mesh and steel weights. But Carlos isn't laughing now. Neither are they. Because his primitive net is doing something their expensive gear couldn't. It's holding, and inside it, 300 pounds of pure feeding frenzy is trying to eat its way out. This is the story of how one man's refusal to abandon the old ways led to the most dangerous catch in Amazon history. A catch that would prove traditional knowledge isn't just quaint folklore. It's survival. And in the waters of the Rio Negro, in the dry season of 2019, that knowledge was about to be tested in the most violent way possible. 30 razor-sharp teeth. That's what each piranha carries. Interlocking, triangular, designed by millions of years of evolution to do one thing: bite, tear, swallow, repeat. The red-bellied piranha, Pygocentris natureri, is not the largest fish in the Amazon. It's not the strongest. But pound for pound, it might be the most efficient killing machine in fresh water. A single piranha can take a chunk of flesh the size of a quarter in one bite. A school of 30 can reduce a 12-kilo fish to bones in under 3 minutes. They hunt in coordinated packs. Not mindlessly, not chaotically, with strategy, with rotation. One piranha bites, moves aside. The next one strikes, then the next. A feeding assembly line of teeth and blood. And when the feeding frenzy starts, when the water fills with the scent of blood and the vibration of struggling prey, something changes in their behavior. The careful rotation breaks down. The strategy dissolves into pure, savage competition, every piranha for itself. A boiling mass of muscle and teeth, each fish fighting to get its share before the food is gone. This is what Carlos Mendez was about to face. Not one piranha, not 10, but a horde. A massive school that had been gathering in the shallows of the Rio Negro for weeks, driven to desperation by the worst dry season in 40 years. And he was going to catch them with a net made of plant fibers. The village of São Gabriel da Cachoeira sits at the confluence of 3 rivers in the Brazilian Amazon. It's a place where the modern world and the ancient one collide daily, where satellite phones coexist with shamanic rituals, where outboard motors share the docks with dugout canoes that look exactly like the ones used 500 years ago. Carlos Mendez, 52 years old, is a man caught between these two worlds. His father was a fisherman. His grandfather was a fisherman. His great-grandfather was a fisherman. For generations, the Mendez family had pulled their living from the Rio Negro, using the same techniques, the same knowledge, the same tools. But Carlos's sons, they wanted no part of it. Why use palm fiber when you can buy nylon? His oldest son, Miguel, had said just weeks before. Why spend 3 days weaving a net when you can order one online and have it delivered in a week? Carlos had no answer, at least not one that made sense to a 23-year-old who had grown up with smartphones and YouTube tutorials. But he kept weaving. Every evening, after the day's fishing was done, he would sit on his porch and work the palm fibers, twisting them, knotting them, creating the intricate diamond pattern that his grandfather had taught him when he was 7 years old. The other fishermen noticed, and they laughed. "Carlos is making museum pieces," they would joke at the dock. "Maybe he should sell them to tourists instead of trying to catch fish with them." Even his best friend Roberto had switched to nylon years ago. "It's stronger, Carlos. It doesn't rot. It doesn't break. Why are you being so stubborn?" Carlos would just smile and keep working, because he knew something they didn't, something his grandfather had told him, something that had been passed down through generations of Mendez fishermen. "Modern nets catch modern fish," the old man had said. "But when the river gets angry, when the fish get desperate, you need the old ways." Because the old ways were born from desperation. In January of 2019, the Rio Negro began to drop. Not the normal seasonal drop, but something more severe. The water level fell faster than anyone could remember. Sandbars appeared in places that had been deep channels. Pools that had been connected to the main river became isolated, cut off, shrinking day by day under the relentless sun. And in those shrinking pools, the piranhas gathered. It started with a few attacks. A dog that went to drink at the river's edge. A child who stepped on what he thought was a submerged log. Small incidents, easily explained. Piranhas are opportunistic. They bite when they feel threatened. It's normal, but then the attacks got worse. A fisherman lost 2 fingers pulling in his net. Another was bitten on the thigh while wading in water that was barely knee-deep. A woman washing clothes at the river's edge screamed as something latched onto her ankle and wouldn't let go. The piranhas were starving. The drought had cut off their normal food supply. The smaller fish had died or moved to deeper water. The pools were becoming death traps, overcrowded with predators and nothing to eat. The village council called a meeting. Something had to be done. The attacks were getting more frequent, more violent. It was only a matter of time before someone died. "We need to clear them out," the council leader said. "Net the pools. Remove the piranhas, relocate them to the main channel." The modern fishermen volunteered immediately. They had the gear, the boats, the experience. They would make quick work of it. Carlos said nothing. He just listened, and he remembered his grandfather's words. The first attempt was a disaster. 5 fishermen, 3 boats, 200 meters of modern nylon netting. They chose the largest pool, a kidney-shaped body of water about 50 meters across, cut off from the main river by a sandbar that had emerged 2 weeks earlier. The plan was simple. Stretch the net across the pool, drive the fish toward it, haul them in, transfer them to holding tanks, transport them back to the river. It should have worked. The net went in smoothly. The fishermen began to make noise, slapping the water with paddles, driving the fish toward the mesh. They could see them coming, a dark mass moving beneath the surface, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And then the net hit the water. The piranhas didn't swim into it. They attacked it. In seconds, the nylon mesh was shredded. Not torn, not broken, shredded. The piranhas bit through the synthetic fibers like they were tissue paper, creating holes, gaps, escape routes. The carefully laid net became a useless tangle of torn mesh and broken lines. The fishermen pulled it in, stunned. 200 meters of expensive netting destroyed in less than a minute. "They're too aggressive," Roberto said, staring at the ruined net. "The feeding frenzy. They're biting everything, even the net." They tried again the next day. Thicker mesh, steel-reinforced lines, same result. The piranhas tore through it like it wasn't even there. On the 3rd day, they tried a different approach. Poison. a traditional method using crushed barbasco root to stun the fish. But the pool was too large, the water too deep. The poison dispersed before it could take effect. By the fourth day, the village council was desperate. The attacks were increasing. A child had been bitten while playing in shallow water near the dock. The wound required 23 stitches. That's when Carlos spoke up. "I can do it." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. "You?" The council leader's voice was skeptical. "You couldn't even catch enough fish to fill your quota last month, Carlos. What makes you think you can handle this?" Carlos didn't flinch. "Because I'm not going to use nylon." The laughter started immediately. Even Roberto, his best friend, couldn't suppress a smile. "You're going to use your palm fiber net?" Miguel, Carlos's son, looked embarrassed. "Dad, that's not going to work. If modern nets can't hold them, how is a primitive net going to do any better?" Carlos stood up, slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. "Your modern nets are strong, but they're smooth. The piranhas can bite through them because there's nothing to grip, nothing to catch their teeth. My net is different. The palm fibers are rough, textured. When a piranha bites it, its teeth get caught, tangled. The more it bites, the more stuck it becomes." He paused, letting that sink in. "And there's something else. Palm fiber doesn't smell like plastic. It doesn't taste like chemicals. To a piranha, it's just another plant in the water. They don't recognize it as a threat. Not until it's too late." The room was silent now. No one was laughing. "Give me 3 days," Carlos said. "If I fail, you can try something else. But give me 3 days." The council leader looked around the room. No one objected. "3 days," he said. "But if someone gets killed while you're weaving your museum piece, it's on you." Carlos nodded. He had 3 days to prove that the old ways were not just history. They were the future. The net took him 2 days to prepare. Not to weave, he had been working on it for months, but to modify it, to adapt it for this specific task. The traditional design was meant for catching fish in open water, but this was different. This was a confined space, a pool full of desperate, aggressive predators. He needed to make changes. First, he reinforced the edges, triple-twisted the palm fibers, creating a border that was thicker, stronger, more resistant to tearing. Then he added weight stones, but not the modern lead weights the other fishermen used. River stones, smooth, rounded, tied into the bottom edge of the net with strips of bark. "Why river stones?" his son Miguel asked, watching him work. "Because they're from the river," Carlos said, not looking up from his work. "They smell like the river. They feel like the river. To the piranhas, they're just part of the environment. Lead weights? They smell like metal, like danger. The fish avoid them." Miguel said nothing, but he stayed, watching, learning. The second modification was more subtle. Carlos wove small loops into the mesh at regular intervals, deliberate weak points, places where the net could flex, could give, could absorb the force of a struggling fish without tearing. "That doesn't make sense," Miguel said. "You're making it weaker." "I'm making it flexible," Carlos corrected. "A rigid net breaks, a flexible net bends, and when it bends, it wraps around whatever is inside it, like a fist closing." On the morning of the third day, Carlos loaded his net into his canoe, the same canoe his grandfather had carved from a single ceiba tree 40 years ago. No outboard motor, just a paddle. The modern fishermen were waiting at the dock. Some were curious, most were skeptical, a few were openly hostile. "This is a waste of time," one of them muttered. "We should be trying real solutions, not playing with antiques." Carlos ignored them. He pushed off from the dock and began to paddle toward the pool. Miguel hesitated, then grabbed his own paddle and followed in a second canoe. The pool was calm when they arrived, too calm. The surface was like black glass, reflecting the morning sky. But beneath that mirror surface, Carlos could see movement, shadows, hundreds of them, circling, waiting. He took a deep breath. This was it. The deployment was slow, methodical. Carlos didn't rush. He stretched the net across the narrow end of the pool, the end closest to the sandbar that separated it from the main river. Miguel helped, holding one end while Carlos secured the other to a tree on the opposite bank. The net hung in the water like a curtain, 60 feet wide, 12 feet deep. The palm fibers were almost invisible in the dark water, blending with the submerged vegetation, the fallen branches, the natural debris of the river. Now came the hard part. Carlos paddled to the far end of the pool. He picked up a stick and began to slap the water. Hard, creating noise, vibration, panic. The effect was immediate. The water exploded. Piranhas erupted from the depths, their silver bodies flashing in the sunlight. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They didn't swim. They boiled. A churning mass of teeth and muscle, driven by hunger, by fear, by the desperate need to escape the noise, the vibration, the threat. They raced toward the net. And then they hit it. The first wave struck like a battering ram. The net bulged, flexed. The palm fibers stretched but didn't break. And just as Carlos had predicted, the piranha's teeth caught in the rough texture of the fibers. They bit down, trying to tear through, but their teeth snagged, tangled, stuck. More piranhas piled in behind them. The net began to wrap around the mass of struggling fish, the flexible loops Carlos had woven into the design, allowing it to fold, to close, to form a living, thrashing bag of teeth and fury. The water turned red. Not from the net tearing, from the piranhas themselves. In their frenzy, they were biting each other, fighting, competing for space, for air, for escape. Carlos began to pull. It was like trying to haul in an anchor. The net was heavy, not just from the fish, but from the water, the weight stones, the sheer mass of struggling bodies. His arms burned, his back screamed, but he kept pulling. Miguel grabbed the other end of the net. Together, father and son, they hauled it toward the shore. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the net came in, and then something went wrong. A section of the net near the bottom suddenly went slack. Carlos felt it immediately. A tear, a break. One of the palm fibers had snapped under the strain. The piranhas sensed it too. They surged toward the weak point, biting, tearing, trying to force their way through. Carlos made a split-second decision. "Pull faster!" he shouted to Miguel. They heaved. The net lifted higher in the water. The weak point rose above the surface, above the reach of the piranhas. The break stopped spreading, but now they had a new problem. The net was too heavy to lift all the way out of the water, and if they tried to drag it onto the shore, it would tear apart on the rocks and sand. Carlos looked around desperately. They needed help. They needed... A shout from the shore. Roberto was running toward them. Behind him, 3 other fishermen. They had been watching from the dock. They had seen the net come in. They had seen it working. They waded into the water and grabbed the net. 6 men, pulling together. The net rose. Water poured from it like a waterfall. And inside, visible now, a seething mass of silver and red. 300 pounds of piranha. Maybe more. All of them alive. All of them trapped. They hauled it onto the shore. For a moment, no one moved. They just stared. The net was holding, despite the tear, despite the weight, despite the fury of the fish inside it. The palm fibers had done what nylon couldn't. They had flexed, absorbed, endured. Carlos dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. His hands were bleeding from the rough fibers. His arms were shaking, but he was smiling. Miguel stood beside him, staring at the net, at the fish, at his father. "It worked," he said quietly. "Your primitive net. It actually worked." Carlos looked up at him. "Not primitive, son. Traditional. There's a difference. The transfer took 3 hours. Using buckets and careful hands, they moved the piranhas from the net to holding tanks, then transported them back to the main river. Every fish alive. The village council was stunned. The modern fishermen were silent. Even the skeptics had to admit it. The old way had worked. But Carlos wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, he repeated the process, pool after pool. Each time, the palm fiber net held. Each time, the piranhas were safely relocated. Each time, the modern fishermen watched and learned. By the end of the month, 3 other fishermen had asked Carlos to teach them how to weave palm fiber nets. Miguel was the first student. The story of Carlos's net spread quickly through the Amazon, not just in São Gabriel da Cachoeira, but up and down the Rio Negro. Other villages facing similar problems began to reach out. Could he teach them? Could he show them how to make the nets? Carlos said yes. But he had one condition. "I'll teach anyone who wants to learn. But you have to learn the whole process, not just how to weave the net. You have to learn why. You have to learn the knowledge behind it, the understanding of the river, the fish, the seasons. The net is just a tool. The real skill is knowing when and how to use it." It became a movement, a revival of traditional fishing techniques that had been nearly forgotten in the rush to modernize. Young fishermen who had never touched a palm fiber in their lives began to learn from the elders. Old knowledge, passed down through generations, suddenly became valuable again. Scientists took notice, too. Researchers from the University of Manaus came to study Carlos's technique. They wanted to understand why the palm fiber worked when nylon failed. They ran tests, analyzed the fiber structure, measured the tensile strength, compared it to synthetic materials. What they found surprised them. The palm fiber wasn't stronger than nylon. In fact, it was significantly weaker in terms of pure tensile strength. But it had properties that nylon lacked. It was rough, textured, flexible, and most importantly, it was organic. It smelled like the river. It tasted like the river. To the piranhas, it wasn't a foreign object. It was just another part of their environment. "The piranhas don't recognize it as a threat until they're already caught," one researcher explained. "By the time they start biting, their teeth are already tangled in the fibers. The more they bite, the more stuck they become. It's a perfect trap, not because it's strong, but because it's smart." The research was published in the Journal of Traditional Ecological Knowledge in 2020. Carlos's name was in the acknowledgments. He never read the paper. He didn't need to. He already knew why it worked. His grandfather had told him. But the story doesn't end there, because the success of the palm fiber net revealed something larger, something more important than just a fishing technique. It revealed a fundamental truth about traditional knowledge, a truth that modern society often forgets in its rush to innovate, to improve, to replace the old with the new. Traditional knowledge isn't just a collection of quaint customs and outdated practices. It's a library of solutions, Solutions that were developed over centuries, tested across generations, refined through trial and error in the harshest laboratory of all, survival. When Carlos's grandfather taught him to weave palm fiber nets, he wasn't teaching him a hobby. He was teaching him a survival skill, a skill that had kept the Mendez family alive for hundreds of years, a skill that was born from necessity, from desperation, from the simple, brutal fact that if you couldn't catch fish, you didn't eat. Modern fishing gear is designed for efficiency, for profit, for catching as many fish as possible in the shortest amount of time. It's optimized for normal conditions, for predictable situations, for fish that behave the way they're supposed to behave. But when conditions change, when the river gets angry, when the fish get desperate, modern gear fails. Because it wasn't designed for desperation. It was designed for abundance. Traditional gear, on the other hand, was born from scarcity. It was designed for the worst-case scenario, for droughts, for floods, for times when the fish are starving and aggressive and willing to bite through anything to survive. That's why Carlos's net worked. Not because it was better than nylon, but because it was designed for a different purpose, a purpose that modern fishermen had forgotten. The revival of traditional fishing techniques in the Rio Negro region has had unexpected consequences, positive ones. The villages that adopted Carlos's methods reported fewer conflicts with wildlife, fewer injuries, fewer deaths. The piranhas were being managed more effectively. The ecosystem was coming back into balance. But more importantly, the revival has created a bridge between generations. Young fishermen are learning from the old. Elders who had been dismissed as relics are now being sought out as teachers. The knowledge that was on the verge of being lost is being preserved, passed on, valued. Miguel Mendez, Carlos's son, is now one of the most skilled palm fiber weavers in São Gabriel da Cachoeira. He teaches classes twice a week. His students range from teenagers to retirees. Some are fishermen, some are just curious, but all of them are learning, and every class begins the same way. Miguel holds up a length of palm fiber and says the same words his father said to him. This isn't primitive, it's traditional. There's a difference. The difference, he explains, is respect. Respect for the knowledge of those who came before. Respect for the river. Respect for the fish. Respect for the delicate balance that allows humans and nature to coexist. When you use a palm fiber net, Miguel tells his students, you're not just catching fish. You're connecting to a chain of knowledge that goes back hundreds of years. You're using a tool that was designed by people who understood the river better than we ever will, people who didn't have the luxury of trial and error, people who had to get it right the first time, or they didn't survive. He pauses, letting that sink in. That's why we learn this, not because it's better than modern gear, but because it teaches us to think differently. To see the river not as a resource to be exploited, but as a partner to be respected. And when you respect your partner, you don't just take. You give back. You maintain. You preserve. It's a lesson that goes far beyond fishing. It's a lesson about sustainability, about humility, about the importance of listening to voices that have been silenced by the noise of progress. Carlos Mendez is 54 years old now. He still fishes every day, still uses his palm fiber nets, still teaches anyone who wants to learn. But he's no longer mocked. He's no longer dismissed as a stubborn old man clinging to the past. He's recognized as what he always was, a keeper of knowledge, a bridge between the old world and the new. A living reminder that progress isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about looking back, about remembering, about preserving the wisdom that allowed our ancestors to survive in a world that was far more dangerous, far more unpredictable than the one we live in today. The palm fiber net that caught the deadliest piranha horde in Rio Negro history is now on display in the São Gabriel da Cachoeira Cultural Center. It's torn in places, stained with blood and river mud. But it's intact, a testament to the power of traditional knowledge, a reminder that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and next to it, on a small placard, are the words that Carlos's grandfather told him all those years ago. The words that saved his life, the words that saved his village, the words that sparked a revival of traditional knowledge across the Amazon. Modern nets catch modern fish, but when the river gets angry, when the fish get desperate, you need the old ways, because the old ways were born from desperation. Those words are more than just a fishing tip. They're a philosophy, a way of seeing the world, a reminder that the solutions to our most pressing problems might not be found in the latest technology or the newest innovation. Sometimes they're found in the wisdom of our grandparents, in the knowledge that has been passed down through generations, in the simple, profound truth that the people who came before us were not less intelligent than we are. They were just facing different challenges, and the solutions they developed, the knowledge they preserved, the skills they passed on, those things are not relics of the past. They're tools for the future. Carlos Mendez proved that, with a net made of plant fibers, with knowledge passed down from his grandfather, with the courage to stand up in a room full of skeptics and say, "I can do it." And he did. The locals laughed at his primitive net, until it caught the deadliest piranha horde in Amazon history. Until it proved that traditional knowledge isn't just history. It's survival. It's wisdom. It's the key to living in harmony with a world that is far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than we often remember. The net is still there, in the cultural center, waiting. A silent reminder that the old ways are not dead. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to remember them, to use them, to prove that sometimes the best way forward is to look back. But there's more to this story, a darker chapter, one that Carlos doesn't talk about often, one that almost cost him everything. 3 months after the successful Piranha relocation, the drought broke. The rains came. The Rio Negro began to rise. The pools that had been death traps filled again, reconnected with the main channel. The crisis was over, or so everyone thought. In April of 2019, a tourist boat arrived in São Gabriel da Cachoeira, 23 passengers, Americans, Europeans, Brazilians from the south. They had come to see the Amazon, to experience the wilderness, to fish for piranhas. The tour operator, a man named Juliano from Manaus, had heard about Carlos's net, about the massive catch, about the traditional methods. He saw an opportunity. "I want to hire you," he told Carlos at the dock. "Take my tourists out. Show them the traditional fishing. Let them catch piranhas with the palm fiber nets. They'll pay top dollar for an authentic experience." Carlos hesitated. The nets weren't designed for sport fishing. They were designed for survival, for managing dangerous situations. Using them for entertainment felt wrong, but Juliano was persistent, and the money was good. More than Carlos made in a month of regular fishing. "Just one trip," Juliano said. "What's the harm?" Carlos agreed. It was a decision he would regret. The trip started normally. Carlos took the tourists to a calm section of the river, a place where piranhas were common but not aggressive. He showed them how to weave the palm fibers, how to set the net, how to drive the fish. The tourists were delighted. They took photos. They posted on social media. They called it the most authentic Amazon experience ever. And then one of them did something stupid. A young man from California, trying to impress his girlfriend, decided to jump into the water, right next to the net, right where the piranhas were gathering. "It's fine," he shouted. "I've been swimming with sharks in Australia. These little fish can't hurt me." Carlos yelled at him to get out, but the man ignored him. He dove under, came up laughing, splashed around, and then he screamed. The piranhas hit him in seconds. Not a feeding frenzy, just opportunistic bites. A chunk from his calf, another from his forearm, a third from his hand. The water turned red, real red. Not the murky red of a feeding frenzy, but the bright arterial red of a serious injury. Carlos didn't think. He dove in. The piranhas scattered as he entered the water. He grabbed the tourist, hauled him toward the boat. The man was in shock, bleeding heavily, his eyes wide with terror. They got him into the boat. Carlos used strips of palm fiber to tie tourniquets around the wounds. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. "Hospital," Carlos said to Giuliano. "Now." The trip back to town took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of the tourist screaming, of his girlfriend crying, of the other passengers filming everything on their phones. The man survived. Barely. He lost 2 fingers and needed over 200 stitches, but he survived. And then he sued. The lawsuit claimed that Carlos had been negligent, that he had failed to warn the tourists about the dangers, that he had created an unsafe situation by using primitive and inadequate equipment. The case made national news. Suddenly, Carlos wasn't a hero anymore. He was a reckless old man who put tourists in danger with his outdated methods. The village council called another meeting. This time, the mood was different. "You need to stop using those nets," the council leader said. "This lawsuit could bankrupt the entire village. We can't afford the liability." Carlos sat in silence. Around him, the other fishermen nodded in agreement. Even Roberto, his best friend, looked uncomfortable. "If you keep using traditional methods," the council leader continued, "you're on your own. The village won't support you. We can't." Miguel stood up. "This is insane. My father saved this village. He solved a problem that no one else could solve. And now you're abandoning him because some idiot tourist jumped into piranha-infested water?" "The law doesn't care about that," the council leader said. "The law says we're liable, and we can't afford to fight it." The vote was unanimous. Carlos was forbidden from using palm fiber nets for commercial fishing. If he wanted to continue, he would have to use modern gear, like everyone else. Carlos left the meeting without saying a word. That night he sat on his porch, staring at the river. The net he had used to catch the piranha horde was hanging on the wall behind him, a reminder of what he had accomplished and what he had lost. Miguel found him there at midnight. "What are you going to do?" his son asked. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the net, and took it down from the wall. "I'm going fishing," he said. "Dad, you can't. The council can go to hell." Miguel had never heard his father talk like that. Carlos was always calm, always measured, always respectful. But not tonight. "They want me to forget everything my grandfather taught me," Carlos said, his voice shaking with anger. "They want me to pretend that the old ways don't matter, that traditional knowledge is worthless, that we should just buy whatever the corporations are selling and be grateful for it." He turned to face his son. "I won't do it. I can't. Because if I give up now, if I let them force me to abandon this, then everything my grandfather taught me dies. All that knowledge, all that wisdom, all those generations of learning, gone, erased, forgotten. He folded the net carefully, reverently. "I'm going fishing," he said again. "And I'm using this net. And if they want to stop me, they can try." Miguel looked at his father, at the determination in his eyes, at the net in his hands. "I'm coming with you," he said. They left before dawn. Just the two of them. 2 canoes, 2 palm fiber nets. Heading upriver, away from the village, away from the council, away from the lawsuits and the liability and the fear. They fished for 3 days, caught more fish than they had in months, used the traditional methods, the old ways, the knowledge that had been passed down through generations, and on the 3rd day they found something, a pool, cut off from the main river by a recent landslide, and inside it, trapped, was a massive arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, easily 8 feet long, 300 pounds, maybe more. Arapaima are endangered, protected. Catching one illegally carries a massive fine, possibly jail time. But this one was dying. The pool was too small, too shallow. The arapaima was slowly suffocating, unable to reach the surface to breathe. Carlos and Miguel looked at each other. "We could leave it," Miguel said. "No one would know." Carlos shook his head. "I would know." They spent the next 4 hours carefully netting the arapaima, lifting it from the pool, carrying it over the landslide, and releasing it into the main river. It was exhausting, dangerous. The arapaima thrashed violently, nearly capsizing both canoes. But the palm fiber net held, flexed, absorbed the force, did exactly what it was designed to do. When they finally released the fish, it hung motionless for a moment, as if stunned. Then, with a powerful thrust of its tail, it disappeared into the dark water. Carlos and Miguel sat in their canoes, gasping for breath, covered in mud and fish slime. "That was illegal," Miguel said. "No," Carlos corrected. "Catching it would have been illegal. We didn't catch it. We saved it." They returned to the village that evening. Word of what they had done spread quickly. Not the arapaima, they kept that secret, but the fact that they had defied the council, that they had continued using the traditional nets. The reaction was mixed. Some people were angry, some were supportive. Most were just confused. But then something unexpected happened. The lawsuit was dropped. The tourist from California, after returning home and thinking about what had happened, realized that Carlos had saved his life, that jumping into piranha-infested water had been his own stupid decision, that blaming Carlos was wrong. He withdrew the lawsuit, publicly apologized, even sent a donation to the village to help preserve traditional fishing methods. The council called another meeting. This time the mood was different. "We were wrong," the council leader said. "We let fear make our decisions. We abandoned you when we should have supported you. For that, I apologize." Carlos nodded. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. "The ban on traditional nets is lifted," the council leader continued. "You're free to fish however you want. And we'd like to establish a formal program to teach traditional methods to anyone who wants to learn, with you as the lead instructor." Carlos looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had doubted him, who had laughed at him, who had tried to force him to give up. "I'll do it," he said. "On one condition. We don't just teach fishing. We teach the philosophy behind it. The respect for the river, the understanding of the ecosystem, the knowledge that our ancestors developed over centuries. All of it." The council leader smiled. "Agreed." The São Gabriel de Cachoeira Traditional Fishing School opened in June of 2019. Carlos was the first instructor. Miguel was the second. Within a year, they had trained over 50 students. Within 2 years, similar schools had opened in 6 other villages along the Rio Negro. Today, palm fiber nets are used throughout the Rio Negro region. Not exclusively. Modern gear still has its place. But traditional methods are no longer dismissed as primitive. They're recognized as valuable, as effective, as worthy of respect. And Carlos Mendez, the man who was once mocked for his museum pieces, is now recognized as a master craftsman, a keeper of knowledge, a bridge between the past and the future. He's 54 years old. He still fishes every day, still teaches twice a week, still weaves palm fiber nets on his porch every evening. And when people ask him why he does it, why he continues to use the old ways when modern methods are easier, faster, more efficient, he gives the same answer every time. Because the old ways work. Not always, not in every situation. But when the river gets angry, when the fish get desperate, when modern methods fail, that's when you need the old ways. Because the old ways were born from desperation, and desperation teaches you things that comfort never will. It's a lesson that goes far beyond fishing. It's a lesson about resilience, about humility, about the importance of preserving knowledge even when it seems outdated. Because you never know when you'll need it. You never know when the river will get angry, when the fish will get desperate, when the modern world will fail you. And when that moment comes, you'll be glad that someone like Carlos Mendez refused to forget, refused to abandon the old ways, refused to let the knowledge of his grandfather die. The net is still there, in the cultural center, a reminder, a testament, a promise. The old ways are not dead. They're just waiting for the next crisis, the next challenge, the next moment when modern solutions fail and we need to remember what our ancestors knew. That moment will come. It always does. And when it does, we'll be ready. Because people like Carlos Mendez made sure that the old knowledge survived, that the traditional methods were preserved, that the wisdom of the past was passed on to the future. The locals laughed at his primitive net, until it caught the deadliest piranha horde in Amazon history, until it proved that traditional knowledge isn't just history, it's survival, it's wisdom, it's the key to living in harmony with a world that is far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than we often remember. And that knowledge, that wisdom, that key, it's still there, waiting, in the hands of people like Carlos and Miguel Mendez, in the palm fiber nets that hang on the walls of the cultural center, in the lessons taught at the traditional fishing school. It's not primitive, it's traditional, and there's a difference.